Welcome to the PlayCreate podcast. I'm Kirsten Gunnerud.
I'm Jill Johnson.
So we've got Sam with us today. Sam is a TED speaker and has 2 TED Talks under her belt.
TedX. You have to say TedX.
TedX.
Not the big TED, the
TedX.
little TED.
She is the author of, or co-author of Bigger Love with her husband, Patrick. And just a wise woman that we wanted to share with today and learn from today. And so, how are you?
I'm fantastic. How about you guys?
We're good. We're excited to have you.
Thanks for asking me. I'm ready for like a really nice, deep conversation about love and the heart and intuition, and
all that.
I'm excited. Yeah.
We were talking yesterday when we were introducing you on what was coming up in the month, and it's February, so it's just like a no-brainer because it's all about love everywhere you look. And
Yay!
you're such a goddess of love, but you've gone on a really interesting journey with it, and you're very open, and you don't hide things about what's happening in your relationship, which has been the biggest gift that you've brought to the table of so many people, is that the no holds barred conversation, which can be really exciting and it can be really uncomfortable because some people don't know how to speak that language with loved ones where it's so open. And so we were talking about that, and then we're talking about how we bring love back to ourselves when there's so much love going out, when we're trying so hard to make others happy all the time. When do we really turn it in? So I think the first thing is like how this language became so intuitive for you to speak with your partner in this way, and what led you to start that way, and then how did it open your heart even more? Because I think when you're having these open conversations, everyone just assumes, well, gosh, they're so open-hearted. But it sounds like you were having conversations and then you opened your heart even more over time.
Well, as you guys know, you guys know, but and we talk about it in the book, but our relationship was not always good. The first 10 years of our relationship, the first year was probably great, but then, I already had my son Jacob, we had another kid, we were struggling with our careers, we didn't have any money, you're just going through all the shit of life, and we struggled, and we started to sort of get distant, and then, then our careers started taking off. Well, mine did. My career really took off, and that created more distance, and I don't think we were communicating. We weren't open-hearted. There was not much love there. And in our 10th year of marriage, we signed divorce papers, and I left the country. Actually, I moved to Spain. And when I was in Spain, I realized that all the bad things that were in my life, like the things that irritated me about life, that made me feel like I was unhappy, they weren't gone when he was gone, because I always blamed him. I was like, my life sucks and I'm unhappy because he doesn't do this, or he doesn't do that, or he doesn't say these things, or him. And I was suddenly like, oh shit, this isn't him. This is me. So that started a whole new world opened up. Like, oh shit, the mirror is not a friendly place. So after a year, we ended up getting back together. That's it's not a super long story. We were always in communication with each other because we have 2 children, and we were shuttling them back and forth between, Utah and Europe. And they were also shuttling me back and forth and him back and forth. So we were seeing quite a bit of each other still. And we always still slept together.
Just sleepily.
Not sleeping. We were having sex, wild, crazy sex. He was always seducing me when we would get together, which, I wasn't with anybody anyway, so it didn't matter. I was thinking, this doesn't feel right, but it doesn't feel wrong either. And I missed sex. I missed being touched. When I moved to Spain, I was like the big boss of a giant team. And so I was sort of untouchable. You don't have relationships like any kind of personal, at least I didn't, right? My style of leadership back then was like, like this kind of relationship, like step back from me. So anyway, we slept together still. We ended up getting back together a lot because we both realized that the issues were not each other. The issues were ourselves and how we viewed things and how we didn't take care of ourselves and how we blamed each other for not being happy. So now we've been married almost 24 years. So it's been 14 years since we've gotten back together. And I'm not going to say it's been all smooth sailing. We have our ups and downs, and a lot of the ups and downs mostly come from things that happen to us, right? That come from the outside, and then our ability to navigate through those. My dad passed away. Patty's dad just passed away last year. These are rough waters that you have to, figure out how to work through together. I think the biggest heart-opening thing was really recognizing that I'm in charge of my own happiness, that I have to love myself, which is really hard, by the way. I don't know. I think it's sort of like enlightenment, you're always like looking at it as something that you want to reach, but realize that the journey is just as important. So for self-love, that's how I feel about that too. But as far as communicating, I think we communicate very openly and honestly out of necessity, because to put a bunch of shit in between you, you don't ever get to the real truth. And a lot of times we're finding, and I'm finding, I've hidden the truth from myself so well, I don't even know it's there. And so sometimes, and a good example is like if I'm having a bad day and I'm edgy and I'm moody, and Patty, and I'll, say something snarky to Pat, like whatever, something. Mm-hmm. And he'll look at me and be like, honey, I don't think this has anything to do with me. Like, are you okay? And I'll be like, oh no. Oh no, this is me again. Yep. And then, but that gives me the opportunity to go deeper and try to heal whatever's not right that day. So it's nice that I have that. He acts a little bit as a mirror, like, hey, maybe,
yep.
maybe something else is going on. It has nothing to do with me and our relationship, but something's happening with you. You should try to see what that is.
Check it out. Yep.
How did you guys get to that place? It kind of reminds me of like the taboo subject of if like your partner says, do you think it's your cycle? When were you able to like really hear like, oh,
most
okay.
of the time I don't think they say it that way.
No, they won't say it. Do you think this is your period talking or menopause?
He will say,
isn't it?
So Patty refers to that as the hell bitch period. And I have maybe 2 hell bitch periods a year where I get really, like my period makes me really crazy. I think I realized that being defensive isn't useful.
Yeah.
And just like anger, like getting really angry about something, you can't help feeling the anger, but expressing the anger isn't terribly useful. And I didn't know that. I used to get a lot of things done by expressing my anger or getting defensive. It was really, unfortunately, in business, I was really successful using those tools.
Yeah.
And so then having to come back and be with my family all the time and then run a small business, those tools do not work that way anymore. And plus, it didn't feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys notice? So, I think when you were talking, what we keep talking about about play and create, is that play is just that way where you're looking at things with a little lightness that you wouldn't usually have. It's not as concretized. So when you're able to like laugh at, you're like, well, I have this hell bitch, or I have this. Do you guys notice the impact of playing with humor in your relationship?
Oh my God. Jill, I don't think you've spent enough. I don't know. Have you ever met Patty?
I'm just saying it because I kind of know you already, but just for other people that don't know.
It's one of my favorite things about.
I don't know Patty, but I know you.
Yeah, both of you individually, but together, you guys are hysterical.
Yeah. So my husband, I think part of the reason I marry him and that we're so happy is he is so fucking, am I allowed to say fuck on this
Yeah,
podcast?
I think
Okay, good. Sorry.
You have
I'm
but that's
like a
Well,
beep. He is so fucking funny, and he has the best sense of humor. And so we laugh. We have laughed through most of our lives. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Like even when things are rough, Patty can pull a joke out of nowhere. And like one of my favorites was, this was in the first 10 years of our marriage, and I'm screaming at him about who knows what, right? And I'm yelling, and I'm like having a full tantrum.
Yeah.
And I look over, and he's got his shirt pulled up, and he's got his stomach like pushed out as far as he can, and he's like, "You're upsetting the baby."
That's awesome.
And I couldn't stop laughing. I was like, and after that, I didn't remember what I was talking about, which clearly then was the message, like, sometimes when you're angry, it's not really about anything. It's you're dealing with an emotion that's human, and there are healthy ways to deal with them, and there are unhealthy ways to deal with them.
Yeah.
So most of the work that we've done on our relationship has really been work on ourselves, not anything that we actually do together, which I think people find fascinating. It's very counterintuitive.
Yeah, because you think you've got to fix things in each other to have the relationship work, when ironically what you have to fix is your own stuff.
It's
Your
funny.
own stuff.
My grandma, Ivy, I asked her once, like, what was the secret to their marriage? And she said, well, after the first 20 years, we figured out we couldn't change each other. And then it was smooth sailing after that. And I think that's like the big thing of being aware that so often we're trying to change versus just looking in like, well, why do we need that change? And what is it? And how can we feed the relationship? Because it's its own being by
Yes, it is.
ourselves, you know?
I love what you said that too. Like when you realize that you can't control anyone, you can't change anyone, and if anything's going to change, it has to be you. I mean, that's just a truth. That's a universal truth. You can't control or change anything. If you think you're controlling and changing someone else, it's kind of an illusion, right? They're choosing to do what you're asking. They're choosing to change themselves, but you're really not doing that, right? They're doing that. So once you realize you can't control or change anyone or anything other than yourself, that's a moment, right? Like, oh shit, if I want this relationship to change, I got to change me. My perception, the way I'm viewing things, the way, just like your grandmother Ivy. And it is smooth sailing, because then you're like, oh, I have full control over how I respond or react to whatever is happening in my world.
The paradox that I've never heard this come behind it, but the paradox is when you do that work, you do change.
It does change.
That's the right way to say it, but other people and situations, they shift and they change. And so the irony is, no, you can't. And yet when you do that work and you recognize your own role in it, it has the effect, the paradoxical effect of creating what you were looking for to begin with.
Well, and this kind of goes, sorry, go ahead, Jill.
To perspectives, like what you're seeing. Suddenly your whole perspective changes because you've changed your outlook.
Yeah, and if you can get to the place where you're creating your own happiness, because you're the only one that can do that anyway, and that raises your vibration, and that raises everyone's vibration around you. Like when you're happy, these people that you get around, and you're suddenly, you don't even have to say anything to them, and you're like, oh, I feel so good today, like you two are that way, right? You just get around you and you're like, oh, it's such a good day, everything's fabulous. And it's not even a conversation, it's a feeling that you get around these people who have these high vibrations that are creating their own happiness.
Yeah.
Well,
and it sounds so cliche. I think that's a hard thing for some people to really understand about creating happiness, because when there's so many curveballs. So when the two of you went through that loss, I mean, losing a parent is a very big loss, and it also brings up stuff that you haven't visited. It unearths things. It's kind of like having a bulldozer go through, and all of a sudden you see all these artifacts that you didn't really anticipate to find. In those moments, it's really hard for people to see, well, how do I create my own happiness in this? Do you notice like little guideposts or little lights that helped you in those moments where it felt pretty dark?
When my dad died, I don't think I just fell apart. And I think most of my growth as a human being happened after that, because I went to such a dark place. I turned to drugs and alcohol and eating too much, like that. I used all that to try to cope with it. And then the universe was like, nope. And I got like smacked down, and I started having panic attacks, like horrible panic attacks that were so debilitating. I had to do something. So that was not a small sign. That was a big
Yeah.
sign, right? Like you're going to have to change a lot of things about yourself to figure out how to do this. Because I was, and at that time, and I wouldn't admit it then. I think I admitted it maybe to a few people, but I was suicidal. I was like, I cannot live like this. I can't live afraid of breathing. Breathing, if I felt a deep breath, that was what triggered a panic attack. Like, that was awful. So I did all kinds of stuff. I've done so much work to try to, I still have them, but not like that.
Yeah.
So all the work that I've done since then, though, has brought that amazing grace. And it's not perfect. Like, then Pat's dad died this year, right? And it's funny, in our book, one of the things we say, because one of the whole chapters is about, we call it stop, drop, and roll. Like, when something is wrong, it's going wrong with your partner, and they are distraught, or something bad is happening, or they're depressed, whatever it is, it's so important that you are able to really be there with and for them, right? You are the person that loves them the most. And so we think these are critical times in relationships, and they will make you or they will break you.
Yeah.
Patty was amazing when my dad died. He was so supportive. He was amazing. When Pat's dad died, I was wanting to be so amazing. The morning that he died, Pat answered the phone, and he started crying, and I was trying to, he didn't tell me for a few minutes what had happened. And then when he did, he got up. I held him for a little bit, and then he got up and, like, basically kind of shut the door, and he left. He flew across the country without me. He said, no, you stay here. I'm going to go, be with my mom and blah, blah, blah. And that felt so bad. Like, I needed to. So I flew out the next day without his permission, and he actually was grateful for that. But it was interesting, his grief. My grief was very crying a lot and expressing my sadness, and I was doing it the right way. And Patty was angry and irritable and annoyed and took it out, like, would be irritated with me. And we actually sold everything, sold our house and everything, which was our plan for this year. Sold our house, sold most of our stuff, and we moved to Tennessee into the house with his mother. So for 6 months, I think, we were living with his mother. And that was the time when and neither one of them were crying or showed any sadness, but they were definitely irritated with everything. And I didn't handle that well at the beginning. I kept saying to Pat, like, I think you should, like, it was sort of, I was trying to bring up that same kind of like, honey, I don't think this has anything to do with me. And that didn't work with him. And it certainly did not work with his mother either. So I just sort of went into radical self-care, where I had to sort of build a bubble where I didn't let anything that they said or did get into my heart. I protected my heart. I meditated a ton. I exercised relentlessly. And that kept my happiness, I could still have that happiness even when the guns were firing, so to speak. So, and I don't know, and I still was as loving and as giving and as caring as I could be to his whole family, really. And I don't think I could have done that or been that had I not been taking such good care of myself, like, and my eating, just the whole bit.
You know, it's interesting because I worked in hospice, and that was the thing
Wow.
I learned the most. So when I first started, I had ideas of what grief looked like, which you said like the right way.
The right way.
Yeah. So I would walk spaces expecting, not even knowing I was expecting it, what I thought the grief should look like. And then over time, I mean, it changed. It was never the same. It was always different. It was never what I would experience. So it really made me aware of like just holding space. And my biggest thing I learned was, how do you hold space? So let it come in, but also not let it become you, not take you down. So the biggest thing about the caregiver is that the impact it has. And what we're seeing more and more in our culture is as everybody is aging and one of the partners is taking care of them, the impact on the partner. So how can you be there, but not, and also not build a wall so you're not there at all?
So Sam went into radical self-care.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
how do you do that? Like, what are 2 tools the people listening to us could play with and explore to do that?
Well, I think that it takes a little time, because you have to really see how they're grieving versus how you're grieving, and not label their grief as
no judgment.
No judgment, and how they're going about it, and just acceptance. Like, it's like your kids, like just accepting who they are. And as people are aging or as people are grieving, accepting as they're going through it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just acceptance.
That makes total sense, because if you accept that, it doesn't become yours.
Yeah.
There's another thing. Yeah.
Ownership over it. Like, you can do something or you can change it. You're just accepting what it is and loving them anyway.
Yeah.
Which immediately helps set that imaginary, if you will, but real boundary.
Yeah.
And where you can then still show up.
There's another thing I think about, and that helps me also, is the difference between empathy, which everybody says, oh, you should empathize, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think I agree, actually. I think it's useful to learn how to empathize if you don't know how to try to feel what someone else is feeling.
Yeah.
But the empathy, for me anyway, like, when one of my girlfriends lost her child, I think I went so far into empathy that instead of being and holding space for her grief and in a higher state, I sunk down with her in her grief, which I don't think is particularly helpful. So I like to think of empathy as like learning to feel something that someone else is feeling, but that isn't the place I try to go to when I'm with someone who's grieving or angry. I go to compassion, which is different. You're still feeling the pain, but you're holding it in this container of love, which again is sort of that boundary, but it allows you to feel what they're feeling deeply, but not sink to the pit of despair, is what we, in our family, we say, oh God, he's in the pit of despair. Not sink into the pit of despair, but be above the pit with your hand down, like, hey, when you're ready to come out, I'll be waiting for you.
Yeah.
I love that you described it as a container of love. So I think you guys have heard me talk about this, but I don't think we've talked about this on the podcast yet, is how I had an experience once, and I was told to fill it with love. And at the time I was very angry and I was very mad and I wanted to do something about it. And I just kept hearing, fill it with love. And the first time I heard it, I laughed. I'm like, what's that going to do?
Yeah.
And the second time I kind of laughed again, but it started to go, okay. And the third time I just did that. And all of that anger almost immediately went away. And I'm not saying it's always that easy, but in almost anything, when we're having those really hard, challenging feelings, what I learned in that process and what I've learned in the times that I remember to do this is that when you do fill that container with love, some of, if not all of it, just kind of dissolves. It is the best way I can describe it. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it's amazing what that compassion and love can do, not just for other people when we're holding space for them, but even within ourselves when we're having these emotions that are really challenging and hard to deal with. So that's one of the tools that I use for that. So
it's interesting. I've been playing with 2 different techniques in the last few months, trying to really get rid of my anxiety. I have horrible anxiety, like I said, with the panic attacks. I still have them. I have so many things that I want to be and do and share with the world, and I'm fucking terrified. So I'm trying to figure out how to work through that. I don't know. I've clearly not gone deep enough to dig it out and heal it, but I'm trying different things to see what might work. One is called the releasing technique. And this idea is that, and you can look, it's releasingtechnique.com, and they do all kinds of stuff, but it's this idea that all of our pain and suffering is really caused by wanting control, wanting approval, and wanting safety. And if you look at those 3 things, they're illusions. We don't really ever have them, right? They're not real. We can make ourselves feel that way, but we can't control if someone approves us. We can't control people. We can't create. Safety is sort of an illusion, right? We could die at any moment of anything, and so they're tricky. And so the idea is that every emotion that you have, it's part of one of those 3 things. And so if you can release wanting control, wanting approval, wanting safety, it will create peace. And I've had some luck with that. I probably need to practice it more to really dive in. But before I did my TEDx talks, I had a guy help me release before so that I could get on stage and not shit my pants, really, is really what I thought was going to happen.
And what's so ironic, Sam, and you and I've talked about this, is anyone watching you when you do these would have no clue, not even an inkling, that that's how you feel before you step on stage. So I love that you're sharing this with people, because it's important. Like, a lot of times how we appear isn't necessarily how we feel inside. So keep going. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. It's awful. And so I don't want to speak anymore, but also I feel that my intuition is like, no, you have to keep talking. You have to keep sharing your message. Your messages are important. The world needs to learn how to love better. So I'm like, well, shit. And the other thing that I've been playing with, I just read this book by Kamal, someone starts with a B, Berkstad something. Okay, anyway, the name of the book is Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have read that, but
no.
So it's this idea that you're filling the container with love, but the container that you're filling with love is yourself. And so I started doing this a few weeks ago, and it's a lot. It's like, you know how, in meditations, people use mantras and you pick different ones, and there's all kinds of, this one's like this, the simple mantra is, I love myself, or I love me, or I am love. So you get to pick from one of those 3 things. And I do like a 20-minute meditation in the morning. I only say that. When I start to feel edgy during the day, I take 10 deep breaths and do the same thing. And then at night, again, I fall asleep saying that to myself. I can't tell you how peaceful it has made me. Yeah. Like where I went, so I also have this thing that I do. I mean, I have a lot of anxiety disorder, like PTSD I was diagnosed with anxiety disorders, like whatever, it's a lot. And one of the things I do is that in any situation, I imagine the worst possible thing happening. Yeah. And I do it constantly. Like I live directly next to, I don't know, I wonder if you guys can see it. I don't know if this is gonna work. You might have to cut it out or whatever, but can you see out the windows?
Ooh, the red
rocks, yeah.
Yeah, those big cliffs.
Yeah.
So of course I'm like, well, these rocks do come, you watch like the sediment coming down these hills, like a giant rock could come down and kill me. It has happened actually near here. So these are the kinds of thoughts that go through my head all the time. Or I'm hiking and I see a dead deer that's been picked clean. I'm like, oh my God, there's probably big cats here. I'm probably going to get eaten by, it's a constant. And when I started doing this, I got through a couple days and I was like, holy shit, I have not had one fearful, anxious scenario thought in days. Like when I can't even remember a day that didn't. And again, this is not a conscious thing I'm doing. I'm not consciously doing these. It's like the little annoying monger in your head that's like, you're shit. Awful things are going to happen to you. It's very dangerous. You're probably going to die. When I started doing this love thing, it stopped. And again, like it depends on how intensely I do it. On a day that I'm not doing it as intensely, they're not quite as peaceful. But when I am very intently doing that, I have found that is really changing me. I think it's really changing me.
That's awesome.
We were talking yesterday about how if more of us loved ourselves, what the world would be like.
Oh,
because
I think it would be amazing.
Wouldn't it? Because so much of what's out there is, again, that mirror you talked about at the beginning, right? It's reflections of how we're in some ways feeling about ourselves.
Well, and the fear, when you were talking about that, I just kept seeing the brain and that whole fight and flight response. And that's just what we've come from, and how doing this just retrains, because it's a muscle. So here you are working this muscle in a different way, and all the elasticity to get everything, the synapses to fire in different ways, so that instead of going straight to fear, it's hitting a new center, which is that holder of compassion. And it's like having a pool to dip from and be like, oh, well, I can choose from this, or I'm training myself to see it in this way, which is really amazing.
And I love that because so many people today, and I love that this is coming up, are dealing with anxiety on different levels, right?
Yeah.
And most of the time what I see is tools to deal with it when it happens. And what you're doing is you are creating this way of being that is a tool to help it not pop up so much. And that's also beautiful, right? Because we get so focused on solving the problem instead of like just kind of shifting our overall state of being, building the pools that then helps everything else work differently. That's beautiful.
Yeah. I've been doing this since I started doing research and trying to quit the panic attacks. If I don't work out pretty regularly and if I don't meditate every day, my world goes to shit. Like it's a not negotiable thing for me, because otherwise the anxiety starts to take over, and in a few days I will be having panic attacks again, probably.
That's like with your relationship. So the relationship to ourselves and your relation, because that's what you keep talking about, is your bigger relationship, but our relationships are active. Like we have to participate in them and when we're turning it in on ourselves, we have to actively participate in ourselves. It's just, it's the same with me. If I'm not moving, if I'm not aware of certain things, it's so easy to go passively into a state that, it works, but is it really my best relationship with myself? Not at all. But we get used to going co-pilot for a while.
Yeah.
And you have to really take the reins. And I love that idea of, love yourself like your life depends on it. And I was listening to a podcast with, I think it was Dax Shepard and Will Arnett. And Will had said something to him like a long time ago that he's like, always bet on yourself. And he's like, I've been doing that my whole life. I'm betting on myself. And I think it's that am I going to put the chips on me, or am I just going to keep putting them on something else, hoping that it will somehow come my way? And I just think that idea of like turning it back inward, it's really important, but it is work. We talk about it. It's like that work thing.
Yeah.
Love is a verb.
Yeah.
It is absolutely a verb.
And it feels kind of hard and overwhelming. Like even what you described, for some people that probably is like, well, I don't have time to sit and say that to myself for 20, and I don't have, the irony there too, and the paradox is that little bit of time gives you so much more, and everything that you show up to shifts. And so, and no, it isn't easy at first, and might not feel good at first, and it might feel weird at first, and all kinds of other things, but the beauty of it is that when we do put the time into that, it not only creates massive amounts of time, it creates flow, it creates all this other stuff that you maybe don't believe that's what's going to happen in the beginning, but when you really do put that time and effort into it, it's amazing what shifts, and so powerful.
It is amazing what shifts. And it's interesting too, when Kamal's talking about how when he reaches self-love, which I want to mention one thing too about, you can't just say it, I love myself, I love myself. You have to really try to feel it. And that's a tricky bit. And I think I learned about unconditional love when I had my children. And so I can just picture the faces of my kids, and I can feel that love, and then I turn that inward. And that works for me to really feel that love. But what's interesting is Kamal talks about magic happening, just things start to come together when he starts to love himself. And I feel like I am very much experiencing that right now. We have our book launch coming up, and that's been going really smoothly. In our last book launch was not like that at all. And I mean, I've done planning, but I haven't done planning like I used to, where I had to control every little thing. I have a team of people. I trust them. They're doing what they're supposed to. It's been so magical.
Well, as we start to close up, because we want to see you again, is there anything that you want to conclude with about just your own self-love journey and what you'd like other people to bring forward into their lives?
So we always try to have an invitation at the end, right? Some kind of invitation for people to think about and play with and try. And so based on all the things that you've been sharing, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but
it's good.
I'm not sorry. Put her on the spot.
I'm not sorry either. Bring it.
What would the invitation that you'd want to send out to people be?
Oh, I would invite people to work really hard on loving themselves, whatever that looks like for them. And because it manifests in a lot of ways. Self-care, like taking care of yourself, is a way of self-love. What we were talking about, trying to feel love and turning that inward. Even doing things that light you up, things that really make your heart sing. Taking time to do that for yourself. I would just challenge people to do that and try it for a little while and see what happens. Because really, this is an experiential thing. This isn't like I'm telling you to do this because I'm preaching to you. This is like, try it and see what happens. See if things don't open up and blossom and you're not happier and freer and more calm and peaceful. Because that's been my experience. So now I'm like, everyone should at least try it.
PlayCreate
Play
forward.
Yes, play forward, baby.
Yeah.
We love you.
Oh, I love you ladies too. You're some of my favorite people on the planet.
Oh my gosh, we can't wait. We'll watch it and then we're going to talk about sex.
Yeah, let's talk about sex.
Let's talk about sex, baby.
All right.
Love you, baby.
Thanks.
Love you.
See you soon.